Welcome to Deep, the healthcare marketing podcast. I'm John Mangano. Deep is the show where we explore how marketing improves patient health with the people who are doing it. We've all been there. We're getting to know a new friend and they ask that question. So, what do you do? When I say I'm a farmer marketer, there's always some kind of reaction. I usually hear about an obscure condition they learned about through an ad, and then how the ad is wasted on them because, well, they don't have the condition and certainly don't have the symptoms. But when you think about it, those ads aren't wasted at all. Every ad someone sees is educating them about conditions that otherwise they might never have heard of. This is especially so with rare conditions. By definition, these diseases only impact a small percent of the population, but when not diagnosed, have a profound impact on the lives who have them. And advertising is an important way people learn about them. Sometimes the first way, and in some instances, it's the ad that drives them to talk to a doctor. So today, we're going to talk about marketing to patients who suffer rare conditions. I'm joined by my longtime colleague and friend, Kate Gattuso Duffy. Kate is the global lead of media measurement, optimization, and web analytics at Pfizer, and prior worked at Publicis Health Media, where we first got to know each other. Welcome, Kate.
Hey, John, thanks for having me.
Have you ever had that experience?
I, it's I've had the experience where someone has said to me, "All I see are pharma ads on TV. Should I be paying attention to them? Why are they targeted to me?" So that's kind of the similar experience I've had.
Yeah, I because my wife knows very well what I do and how I do it. She's always asking me when an ad that really isn't related to anything we have, does that mean we have this? Should we, get checked up? But it is a funny thing. When I have friends who are doctors and they find out, they really are interested in what exactly is it that we're doing. But it is so important because there are so many conditions that people readily talk about that they might never have heard of otherwise. In fact, if you think about it, we all kind of stopped our education, and we only focus on things that we maybe like. And if we're not in healthcare, there aren't many people who are pulling up books about conditions that they may have and reading about them for fun. So if you're not seeing ads and having other ways to learn, this may be your only source of information.
Yeah, you're right. And when you think about it, everybody's a patient, everybody's a caregiver, everybody's some sort of health decision maker in their family. So the ability to make sure you always see those, whether it be a broad reaching kind of conversation like we see in on TV, or when we see more really micro targeted relevant ads that are kind of more home hitting to you and should be something you focus on.
Yeah, and it's funny because as marketers, and whether we're health marketers or not, no one ever when I worked in another industry, no one talked to me about those telecommunications ads. Why do I have to see them? Everyone kind of accepts that they are what they are. Whether you like them or not, you understand what they're for, and they don't have nearly as noble of a purpose as, say, a pharma ad.
Totally. And, when we think about pharma ads and we think about the goal and the vision, it's really helping patients seek care in the way that is most effective, convenient, and effective for them. And then on the flip side, HCPs, we market to patients and a lot. We also market to HCPs, of course, but part of our patient marketing is really intended to have some HCP effect as well.
So, Kate, tell me about your role as the global lead of media measurement, optimization, and web analytics.
Yeah, of course. So I joined Pfizer a little bit over a year ago, and it was a new group. I was the first person in the department under our media team within the central marketing organization with Pfizer. And it's interesting because you start a new capability like this within an organization that's been around for 175 plus years. So we've really been focused on advancing and modernizing our marketing within media, creative, and web analytics, and understanding how to bring the best tools, people, process into optimizing our media and our effectiveness to make sure that we're serving the patients and the providers in the most effective way that we can with our marketing investment.
Media has been changing so much in the last 5 or 10 years. Has that made it easier to find sufferers of rare conditions, or does that kind of compound the degree of difficulty?
I think it's a two-way answer, right? The more we evolve, the more tech we have, and the more different places we need to address a fragmented ecosystem. There's certainly an element of as tech evolves in different silos, and as we're kind of working through that, how do we make sure we move with speed and agility while we're working to make sure everything stays connected and we can really be agile with our decision making. I think on the positive side, there's been a ton of evolution in how we can approach audience targeting with our data. Before, where we were really looking at anchoring on audience quality as the core ability to be optimized within our audience performance and our audience optimizations, we can do so much upfront work with the audience data now that we can really start to think both clinically and from a lifestyle overlay perspective how we can be really advanced in our personalization and our marketing.
I think that's the difference, and unless you're using advanced marketing techniques in the digital world, even if you're a marketer kind of in traditional television or just in the traditional way marketing is done, I don't think people realize, on the one hand, in general, marketing is a numbers game. So the number of impressions you get ultimately will have a percent that respond in the way you want them to, regardless of the industry, or at least that become aware. And then a portion of those ultimately do some sort of behavior that a marketer is looking for. But then on the flip side, the ability to reach an individual in a rare condition or any individual or group that is extremely rare becomes really hard. And so you end up spending a lot of money to reach a scarce profile of a person, or in our case, a patient. And ultimately, the harder it is to find them, the less likely the economics will support spending on the marketing to reach them. Which, if you're selling maybe a luxury watch, maybe that's not a big deal. But if you are offering a solution to help resolve someone's chronic pain or extend their life in some instances, how do you make that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question because when you think about the reduction of waste in the process, really using data and the right type of data and understanding the patient journey within the clinical data set, right? So understanding, okay, these are the type of patient data claims we might see 3 to 9 months before a patient is diagnosed with this rare condition where we know diagnosis is a challenge even just getting there. So really going through that process across end to end of where we can think about, okay, the ultimate goal is to reach this patient. We know that an overwhelming amount of the patients don't have the condition or aren't aware that, perhaps these symptoms are driving this condition. Or there's a whole subset of patients who might be in an underserved community and don't have access to some of the information that we're trying to really get to them from a patient care perspective. So, I think it really comes down to just understanding the true advancements in patient data, as well as some of the consumer and lifestyle data that we can overlay in meeting them where they are as people. But if we can start to understand and identify some of those really smart, intelligent signals, that helps us really reduce that waste so that we can make sure that we drive that investment that ultimately includes our effectiveness and our ability to continue the investment in the space year over year while serving a patient population that is really in need of the support.
So, what do you think is the biggest difference that marketing rare conditions would have compared to, say, a high cholesterol or diabetes, which unfortunately is rather common, for all of us?
Totally. And the volume of data is tremendously different when we're thinking about those different patient populations and then the sample of data that we get to work with, right? So I think the precision and the predictiveness is so incredibly important in the latter when we're working with a rare disease, because when we think about such a broad reaching condition like a diabetes or a heart condition, there's so many patients out there, or there's so many caregivers out there that you're really likely to be effective with, if we're measuring audience quality, or even if we're measuring getting a patient back into their cardiologist and getting them adherent. It's a much easier journey to get that patient there across the full ecosystem than when we think of a rare disease where you need to have a lot of different tests. You need to have some payer conversation. So really, there's a huge balance we play in this process of optimization with just not better targeting, but also better messaging, better education, better sequencing and orchestration. And without the kind of mix of those elements, it can be really challenging within the rare disease space.
Right, and that's the cruel irony because, uh, you know, people will more often talk about the high incidence conditions like high cholesterol. So the likelihood that you'd be aware of it as any individual would be much higher simply because you probably know someone who's touched by it. But when it's a rare condition, it's much harder because people aren't talking about those because they may themselves have not been exposed to it. Um, and that's the hardest part because maybe that's where the biggest conversation needs to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the efforts and the work become life changing for people, right? It really changes the ability to understand the care with the data. So, where we talk about, why did you get into pharma marketing, or what excites you about the work? It's really, people think about healthcare as having a limited ability to be precise and to really, be super strategic. But really, there's so many different signals that you can use in a privacy safe way that ultimately increase the experience for everyone.
Yeah, that's so true. So, what are the main things that marketers need to do differently when marketing for rare conditions?
It's a good question. I would say not try to be everywhere, right? I think that's a big piece that tends to get lost. Sometimes marketers want to be everywhere. They want to be on TV and they want to be across every single channel. And meanwhile, you're not going to be able to do that in rare marketing disease campaigns because you do need to be really precise and strategic with your dollars. So, making sure that upfront work is really focused on, really intentional, really purposeful, is grounded on data, both within the patient set as well as who they are as people, I think is tremendously valuable and important.
So, we're both analytics people.
You can tell.
Yeah. Somehow we
I'm not sure how many times I've said data.
you know, we focus on the analytics of campaigns, and inevitably that's all data driven. Um, and we know data has bias. But when the data is as scarce as it is in rare conditions, what are the things that you have to manage to that are unique to rare conditions as it pertains to the bias that's there and just the challenges? And all data has bias, and it's just it's that's not a bad thing. It's just not accounting for it in your analysis that ultimately can get you in trouble. What are the things that you've learned that makes that you would share with your younger self if you could, that would help you kind of have the success as early on as possible?
Yeah, it's funny because there's a quote, and I will not remember who to give the credit to in the moment, but there is a quote that says, data can tell you anything you want it to, so it might as well agree with me. And that can be a case, right? And if you think about your younger self, you think about, okay, somebody's asking me a business question, I have to prove their answer is right. And I think that is the challenge, and that's the difference. And when you start to do things differently, is it's okay to have tests and learns. It's okay that every business question isn't going to be exactly the way the stakeholders are looking for it to be. But at the end of the day, as long as you're learning and you're doing that, whatever, whether it's fail fast or, managing performance for learnings, it helps ultimately improve how you're going to reach that rare disease patient or provider with the content you need to give them.
Yeah, I've always found if the data tells me what I wanted to hear or I thought I would hear, I usually trust it less than what I would have expected it to be, just simply because sometimes it's too obvious, and we see what we want to see, but there's always something two layers below in the data that is adjusting or should adjust what you're taking from it.
Exactly. Anytime I see two numbers on a screen that look too similar, even, I'm like, can you go back and just double check? There's no way in statistical anomalies that would be the case.
Yeah, I think people think when analytics people do what we do that it is all science. I think most of it is intuition and even a little bit of superstition as I look at it, and I'm like, just I can't tell you why, but numbers don't act that way, and usually there's something to that.
Totally.
So when you're leveraging data to quantify for success, what are you doing differently in doing so for rare conditions?
Yeah, there's a lot of different complexities when you think about the data sets that you're able to use with rare conditions. So you're using the right amount of data that has a sample and has the confidence in that sample for you to make decisions. So whereas, best practice could typically be an incremental new patient start metric. It looks at a test and a control, and you feel really, really confident that you've covered all other variables, and you can make this change. Sometimes you need to go to the next best metric, right? So you need to think about, okay, I might not get enough sample to truly look at what my ideal state would be. How do I look at a signal that will tell me my media or my advertising is incrementally driving more patients into their right doctor? And how do I look at, perhaps I'm reaching the right patient, but I'm also reaching a patient of newly diagnosed subsets. And that's a really important success factor and optimization tool as well.
So when we look at the data, some of the challenges that we deal with, especially in rare conditions, is that there are underrepresented populations, and there are lots of good reasons. It could simply be the population doesn't seek treatment in a way that the data is being captured, or it could be I've seen it where due to insurance coverage, doctors are coding things a little differently to make sure that coverage is met for the condition. How do you identify that, and what have you seen work to make sure that despite maybe data coverage issues or anomalies, you're able to get the insights that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about how you design the data for the patient set. There's generally going to be biased in large data samples when you're trying to optimize towards an underserved or a more niche community market in the space. So, it's really making sure when we're thinking about the underserved community or different sets of patients, we we pair the right data to the optimization and the tool. We can't look at, a multicultural campaign to our general population. We can't optimize that way. We need to look at a multicultural campaign to the right multicultural data set. We need to look at different types of demographics in that specific way so that we can really make sure that we're not allowing, large elements to influence behavior or optimizations we typically make, or those patient populations really need in the process to get the right precision and optimizations.
Definitely. I think in many cases, we don't realize there's inherent bias in my world, we're a DSP, right? So we are serving ads to populations that ultimately are reachable. And not all populations are reachable, or at least they don't have a durable ID to reach them. And while we don't target people on their health, we do use durable IDs to make sure that we find certain profiles of people. And those profiles help us reach the right individual. How have you been able to adjust measurement to ensure that those individuals are counted, or at least not left out of a campaign? Because ultimately, if we don't reach people because maybe they render differently in a ad platform, or ultimately in the measurement that is identifying success, we're not just missing part of the population in terms of I hate to say a business opportunity, but we're more so missing a population in terms of giving them better health outcomes.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing to think about because as we think about the intentionality behind it, being really purposeful with how we're reaching these people. I think you mentioned a little bit about the evolution of identity solutions and identity graphs, and that's really helped us progress in this space. I will remember, years ago, we first started working with a publisher who focused purely on multicultural sets, and you know. We were really undereducated in how to market and optimize and use data to the population. And so we would go into the partner conversations and be like, your metrics aren't hitting it. And they really, helped us understand and educate us on the new different data sets we need to think about and being intentional with the KPIs we're setting, right? So maybe it's not a broad diagnosed population, it's a diagnosed population with whatever factors we're looking to serve within that community that tends to be underrepresented in the data.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. It used to be not too long ago, whether it was health marketing or any kind of marketing, multicultural marketing was take your ad, translate it into the other language, and not not even change the creative, and ultimately expect to just have the same results. And there's so much that creative plays in reaching a different subsegment, as well as even language, how something is spoken to is so very different. And that is not just incumbent on the creative design, but also on the legal components, because we do in our business have this thing called ISI, and how ISI presents in one language, in English versus another language, whether that's Spanish or um, Cantonese or Mandarin, differs and can have a very different message to those who receive it.
Different cultures globally, right? In my role, I sit across our international as well as our US, and there's different ways of working that we have with our colleagues in New York versus our colleagues in Japan or in the UK or in some sort of LATAM market. So I think it's pulling those realities of what you know about people, and making sure that you pull them into your marketing versus being so specific in how you think about things.
Could you give us a couple examples?
It's a great question. Um, yes, I think you know, I think you had a great example earlier where you talked about not just translating text in an ISI to a creative, but it's also what is the imagery, what is the research that you need to be doing, whether it be qualitative or quantitative, to those specific visuals and creative content and tone and messaging that will resonate with the right audience, and making sure you do that on the ground work to get that qualitative feedback from these different groups.
That's a great example. So, when you look at cross functional teams, specific as we're talking about rare conditions, how do you manage them? Because while there might be a team focused on a specific brand that is treating a specific rare condition, you might be leveraging attorneys who ultimately are kind of treating all brands the same. You might have other components in the process, creative or otherwise, that may not be fully aware of that. How do you manage the whole process so that that differentiation is being included in each step of the marketing process?
Yeah, I would say using data at the very first step is a really important piece to illustrate that, right? Everybody can have opinions and have hypotheses, but unless you come with, hey, this is not going to be as effective because of XYZ stat that we've learned on these five other campaigns over the years, and this will grow your effectiveness and your impact or your perception and your intent, whatever metrics or KPI set we're looking to really achieve with this specific campaign. As long as you have those kind of key KPIs and can have those specific examples, I think it helps us really drive that influence versus putting it out in the market and then learning a hard way like we had to do years ago.
Yeah, and the market is such you don't need to spend time and money learning. You can learn, or at least in market, you can spend a little bit of money learning prior and have a greater benefit. What is the thing that you feel like the industry is missing as it pertains to targeting rare conditions and smaller segments that you wish we had?
It's a great question. I would say being more aligned to testing and learning in the space versus, being so focused on exactly a prescriptive method. I think with this audience that is so niche, that is so undiscovered, that does need so much support and education, I think it's important to do and learn different things so that ultimately we can start to build better best practices.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's new ideas, right? Doing the same thing we've done over and over is, while it can be easier, it also kind of gets the message lost. And when you're looking at something that's a rare condition, it's so unique. There's so many different angles you could take to it that will make a difference and resonate with a patient, because we all have heard so many pharma messages. So, last question. You've moved from working at one of the largest pharma agencies to one of the largest and one of the oldest pharma brands. What's the difference in mindset that you would see going from the agency side to the manufacturer side?
Yeah, it's funny because I do think that my agency experience has helped served me really well here at Pfizer, specifically with understanding such a large set of the industry and how different teams are showing up and really what the inner workings are to get things across the finish line. So I think that's really helped me. I think in the flip side, as my role in Pfizer, I can really start to see all of the different touch points to help everything work together. So that's been the most interesting thing to me so far is, it's not just media, or it's not just creative, it's not just our websites. It's really this end-to-end ecosystem and how we're looking at things across both our business analytics teams, our content teams, our legal teams, and really all the different complexities that come into play that help make each person a true expert in their product. And then in my role as a centralized marketer, how I can pull best practices and establish standards, but not necessarily standardize in a way that pulls out some of those product niche needs and the way that we serve the rare disease community.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kate. It's been wonderful chatting. I hope to see you at some point. As I drive my old cars somewhere on the Jersey Shore, I could see you off in the distance on your boat.
Yeah, that feels great. Give me a little wave.
All right. Thank you so much. This has been Deep.